Right, so the next item is a stop and search quarterly report, and I think within this report it will pick up on the progress against recommendations that were made back in 2013 around an HMIC report.
Yeah.
And looking at the effectiveness of more recent developments around the best use of stop and search. But I'll hand over to you if you want to talk to this report.
Thank you, Commissioner. There's a couple of things that I'd like to sort of lead into this before I actually get into some of the more specific detail about the report itself. As you know, HMIC recently revisited a number of forces, in fact 8 forces, to try and monitor the progress that we've made since 2013. And whilst the official report isn't actually out yet, Steve Otter, the lead HMI on this, did actually speak to police professional very recently, in fact on the 27th of August. And if I just read out the first 2 paragraphs that he said about West Yorkshire Police, he actually identifies what he thought he was seeing in each of the forces. Inspectors found West Yorkshire Police had improved in almost all areas covered by the 2013 report, particularly in the guidance it provides its officers on the use of stop and search powers in Section 60 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act. They were encouraged that the force is actively exploring how technology can help officers use stop and search powers effectively and fairly, and noted that recording procedures now meant airwave devices could transfer relevant information to the force control room and create an immediate electronic record. It does go on to highlight 1 or 2 areas that we know we've got some further work to undertake, but that overall they were seeing that we were making good progress. And I think that's important, bearing in mind that we were one of the first forces to volunteer to be part of the best use of stop and search programme with the Home Office. So to go on to the detailed report that we've provided for you, I know that you monitor this very, very closely every quarter, and particularly with the Police and Crime Panel. And just to pick out the highlights really. First of all, the report that you have in front of you covers a 12-month period to June 2015, and also the fact that the best use of stop and search scheme will be featuring in next month's HMIC appeal inspection. So we're aware of the fact that there's also some further scrutiny by our HMIC. In the last 12 months we've conducted just over 18,000 stop searches, and this reflects a continuing downward trend in the use of the stop and search powers by ourselves, and a reduction also in the reported difference in stop and search by ethnicity ratios since 2010-2011. You have been quite rightly challenging us about those ratios and those differences, and we've been working very hard through briefings and also training of staff to make people very much aware of the impact of the exercise of the powers and how that can have an impact on our communities. The examination of the stop and search activity over those 12 months, when people have identified their ethnicity, shows around 20% is actively focused on people from a BME background, which is slightly higher than the 18% of the local population from this group. But again, as I was explaining, we are happy that that gap is actually closing. In previous reporting, the proportion of stop and searches for white ethnicity stood at around 81.5%, and that's reduced now to 80%. And again, if you compare that to the census profile, the white population is around about 82%. Again, the majority of the stop and searches were undertaken under either Section 22 of the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, and closely followed by Section 1 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. As we briefed you previously, so officers are exercising the power because they have reason to suspect that somebody is committing offences in relation to drugs, or in fact offences relating to offences such as theft and so on. The best use of stop and search scheme, as you know, this is a voluntary scheme, and the idea and the purpose behind it is to try and explore best practice, and in particular recognise and understand the impact of the exercise of this particular power. We didn't actually conduct any Section 60 authorities during the last quarter, and only one in the previous quarter, and obviously that's the power that we can use when we suspect violence is imminent within the community and within a particular part of the community. Previously, you asked us about community triggers. Nationally, many forces have set 3 complaints as a community trigger. We felt, because of the sensitivity of this, and particularly for our communities here in West Yorkshire, we would set it at 1. There has been 1 complaint and therefore 1 trigger activation, and John has the details of that particular one.
So that was in February of this year in Leeds. A 20-year-old young Asian man has made an allegation against the officers who stopped and searched him that when he was searched by the officers, they didn't explain to him what had actually happened. So of course that went through the complaints procedure. The individual was found to be in possession of Class C drugs at the time, arrested and detained and processed in relation to possession of drugs. The allegation was investigated and not upheld, and there was no requirement for any action to be taken with the officers. So that's the one which we've had, but it was an important trigger for us to then review it.
Yeah.
And so we're now satisfied we've got a process in place, and we'll be able to report back to you if further triggers are initiated.
Okay.
The ride-along scheme we've previously discussed. We've initially launched it for members of the 4 scrutiny panels and independent advisory groups, because we felt that they were probably the groups that would gain the most benefit initially, and take the opportunity to accompany officers and actually see live time how the powers are exercised. Of course, there's a little bit of a dependence on the powers being exercised on that particular time when they are going along with officers. And I think that will have helped in terms of the experience then when they are actually scrutinising specific cases, and perhaps you might want to talk about that a little bit further. Ongoing developments then, bearing in mind that we are part of that best use scheme, the fact that we've had a recent revisit by HMIC, and we also know that HMIC will be talking to us again about this next month. We have continued to put some enhancements in the recording system, very much based upon some of the feedback that we've already been given, and in particular making sure that some of the finer detail is going to be available, and also when, for example, if property is seized or not seized and what the circumstances are and so on. So they're the kind of main highlights. We've previously talked, when we've gone into some more specific details around the demographics, that whilst from an ethnicity point of view there is very much a closing gap in terms of disproportionality between a search on members from the BME community or a search on the white community. We do recognise that there is disproportionality in terms of age. The group between 16 and 29 does actually have a significant higher proportion than other groups. That's very much around the offence types and what we are able to use the powers for. And similarly, and interestingly, I'm not too sure just how familiar the communities are with this, but actually a very, very significant disproportionality in terms of male men and women upon whom we actually exercise this power. And again, that's more to do with the demographics and offence type rather than anything else. Very happy to take any specific questions, Commissioner, but that's an overall summary of where we are with the stop and search.
Okay, thanks very much for that. That report update is welcome, and clearly the headline figure around the continuing fall around 18 down to 18,000 is significant, and the way that you've reported in some of the positive outcomes around the interactions that have taken place is really helpful as well. And as you've mentioned, I'm aware that the HMIC inspection will be taking place in, I think it's the week commencing the 5th of October.
Yes, that's the more comprehensive peel inspection, but there is an element around stop and search that's going to be contained within that in terms of legitimacy with the public. Yeah,
and that's the best use of the stop and search scheme. Yeah. Thanks for bringing to my attention the article in the Police Professional. I recently returned from leave, so I hadn't seen that one. So that is welcome with regards to Steve Otter making those comments in relation to West Yorkshire. So that's well done to all concerned with regards to that. Just some specific questions around the recommendations going back to 2013, the HMIC report. commented on the use of scrutiny groups at that time around monitoring stop and search data on a monthly basis. And now, given that some of these groups are looking at more themed areas around domestic violence, for example, are you satisfied that the level of scrutiny is going to be adequate going forward?
Certainly the feedback that we get from the scrutiny groups and those who participate in the process is all very positive. I do fully accept that the way that we collate our data does mean that we have to rely on taking random samples and then making an assessment of each case. But then clearly, if there are complaints or issues that are raised by members of the public, then we can look specifically into those cases. I know that your office is also involved very much in the process, and I've got to be, candid with you. Nobody's raising any immediate concerns with myself around that process itself. I think what we actually have to do is watch very, very carefully about the numbers of stop and searches that are undertaken, particularly around the localities, and as you know, we do gather the information by locality. And also those areas where perhaps for operational reasons specific issues have been raised by members of the community, and of course many members of the community do support the availability and the use of the power, provided that we are making sure that we use it in the most appropriate and respectful way, because clearly stopping an individual and exercising this power can have a huge impact on that individual and therefore on communities. So it's very much a training regime that we've got to continuously remind people of, and we do that in a number of different ways and different forums. But we've got to keep on doing that, and I recognise that.
I think Commissioner, the larger districts still have dedicated stop and search review scrutiny panels. It's some of the other districts who are just bringing them alongside some of their other scrutiny around domestic abuse or out of court disposals, just through expediency rather than trying to dissolve the power of what they're doing. And of course, as you're aware, we link in with your own youth advisory group and the Force independent advisory group to scrutinise the scrutiny, as it were.
Yes, but clearly it has been a contentious area for a number of years, not just in West Yorkshire, but on a national basis around the disproportionality aspect around stopping and searching of BME communities in particular. And do you feel that the latest figures actually do portray a more genuine approach, if you like, around the disproportionality picture? Albeit I accept clearly that there are less police officers out there because of the budget cuts. But do you genuinely feel that the best use of the stop and search scheme is having the right impact?
I do, because of the fall in numbers. The fall in numbers of the actual cases where the power's been exercised is actually disproportionately out of kilter with the number of officers that are no longer frontline and therefore doing these duties. So I am happy that the penetration is getting out there in terms of officers' knowledge, experience and use of the power. What gets a little bit more difficult to be able to answer is where we are exercising some of these stop and searches is very much intelligence-led and very much depends upon some of the operations that we are running at any moment in time, and they may well be in very specific areas around West Yorkshire, so we do need to watch those very carefully, and that's where the work of the scrutiny panels is particularly helpful, because clearly we can brief them about a bit more detail that sits behind some of those stop searches.
As we've talked before, and we're now in a really a far better place, that half of the stop searches are around stolen property and preventing serious acquisitive crime. There is no disproportionality in those. So in the section 1, that you're more likely to be stop searched if you're white. In fact, it's gone the other way. So there is absolutely no disproportionality based on ethnicity. In the other half, which is to do with drugs, there is still disproportionality, and we'll continue to work on that, but that is in a far better place than where it's ever been in West Yorkshire, and in a far better place to where it is in the rest of the country. So, for example, for an Asian person, the ratio is for every one white stopped for drugs, there's 1.7 for Asian, and for a black person, for every one stop for drugs, there's 1.9. If you recall from the police authority days, that has been a completely different figure and is in the past and is in a far better place. And that reflects nationally, in many ways, the position and the difference between stop search for a serious acquisitive crime, going equipped and property, and stop search for drugs possession and drug supply. And so the two clearly different areas.
There was a report that came out whilst you were away from the office, Commissioner, that actually broke down force by force what that disproportionality was representing. We haven't got a copy of that report for you today, but I'm sure that we can get hold of a copy of it. And it actually, again, West Yorkshire has got one of the lower disproportionality ratios in terms of that than many other forces. So I very definitely feel as if we are making good progress.
Yeah, and I've certainly seen that within the figures that have been provided. So that I think that's certainly welcome with regards to that trend. And the fact that 94% of all stop and search activity is males or where gender is stated, and is that, given that the population of or the gender makeup of the population in West Yorkshire, we've got 49% males. That just reflects reality, does it, in terms of the types of issues that are being looked at?
It does, and also from our knowledge and experience of offending types. But having said that, that is clearly something that we do feel that we also need to continue to do some work with. So we've worked very, very hard around the BME, white disproportionality concerns, but actually, as I know John's pointed out on a couple of occasions now, we do need to try and better understand whether or not this is about offender profiles or whether or not there are some other things that we need to think about. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. And you did mention the ride-along approach, and it's been offered to members of the scrutiny panels and the independent advisory groups, and I accept that things don't happen just because somebody's on a ride-along, but have you had any feedback?
I haven't had any feedback directly, but I understand that Angela Williams, who leads on this on our behalf, has, but I don't actually have that information available today. I don't know whether, Sharon, any information has been passed to yourself? No? No. Okay.
Well, perhaps that's something we can follow up in due course then, yeah, thanks. And just on a slightly different issue, I understand some of the data that was passed to the Police UK website didn't seem quite right, and it was picked up by some members of the community who have contacted me, particularly in relation to the White Irish category, and I think that's been picked up. And can you just comment on what will be done to try and ensure that data is correct in the future?
Well, as you know, Commissioner, the Police UK website is now producing information for all forces in relation to stop and search. We were one of the first forces to go live with it. It would appear, having made some inquiries, that it was a technical error on our part where we had misrepresented the data from white British into the white Irish category. Very, very unfortunate error. Can only apologise on our behalf to any members of the public who were very concerned about that, and clearly we've put steps in place to ensure that it doesn't happen again.
Thanks very much for that, and I think in a sense it's positive that you know that it was transparent, that was picked up on a public facing website, and we've picked that up, so I'm pleased that has been rectified, and thanks for that.
And I'm encouraged that members of the public are actually looking at the website and reporting these things to us.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. Right, I don't have any more questions with regards to that report, so thank you for that quarterly update report on the stop and search.